Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has addressed leaders of the world's largest economies gathered in Indonesia. Russia's war in Ukraine is in the spotlight at this year's G20 summit, despite it not officially being on the agenda. Zelenskyy told G20 leaders via a video message that now is the time to end Russia's war. He once again laid out his conditions for ending the conflict, presenting what he called a peace formula. It includes a complete withdrawal of Russian troops and full restoration of Ukrainian control of its territory.
I'm convinced now is a time when Russia's destructive war must and can be stopped.
Well, let's bring in DW's Chief International Editor, Richard Walker, who's in Bali. Hi, Richard. Great to see you. So, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy, as we've seen there, has made a strong appeal. Tell us what else he had to say.
Yeah, well, Pablo, I mean, we've seen during the course of this war just what an adept communicator Zelenskyy can be in these international fora. We've seen him addressing the United Nations by video link. We've seen him speaking to many national parliaments by video link, getting his message out. And he's clearly, although he's not present here in Bali, making use of the same possibilities thanks to the Indonesian hosts here who gave him the possibility of addressing the assembled leaders by video link to really try and get his message across at a time when, of course, the Ukrainians have momentum in the war. They've just recently recaptured the very important city of Kherson. And you see that kind of communication skill, the sort of pugnaciousness that he often shows really come across in what he said, for instance, addressing dear G-19, not G-20, essentially telling the Russians through that he feels that they've disqualified themselves from membership of this body. So trying to get his message across that Ukraine wants to see an end to this war, trying to kind of recapture the initiative around any discussions of diplomacy, which the Russians have kind of potentially raised the prospects of recently, but the Russians saying, we're ready to talk, but on our terms, and the Ukrainians saying, no, 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 according to the UN Charter, you need to get out of our land completely, then we can talk about peace. So an interesting intervention there by Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and of course, he will really want to be trying to sway some of the minds here, some of the very influential countries, not just Western countries here, of course, but a lot of powerful emerging economies from Southeast Asia and other parts of the world.
Well, Richard, actually, that brings me on to the next question. Is there any chance of unity at the G20 on the issue of the Ukraine war?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's been a lot of speculation in the last few weeks about whether the G20 would even be able to agree on what they call a communique at the end of these summits, you know, kind of a full text of a sort of a program of things that the assembled leaders can agree on. And given how divided the G20 is, after all, Russia is a member of the G20, China is a member of the G20, and China obviously very close to the Russians. But from what we're hearing and what we're seeing in the drafts that have been circulating of this communique that the Indonesians are trying to get together, there is language about the Ukraine war, and so simply noting that there are differences among the different countries. So in saying, for instance, that a majority of the countries condemn this war, but also acknowledging that the G20 is not really a forum for security matters. The G20 is meant to be a forum primarily for discussing about the economy. But of course, everything is connected. The fallout from the war has been very, very severe for a lot of economies around the world, particularly emerging economies and developing economies, which are badly hit by high energy prices and high food prices.
Thanks, Richard. DW's Chief International Editor, Richard Walker, reporting from Bali.